Sonic Archives 5. Everything old is Newt again. I looked up the issue on a wiki, and that's the only reason I found out about the story. Apparently there's an extra story in a volume dedicated to reprints. And this was originally meant to be an official comic, but it got scrapped. But they dug up the original writer and artist and had it made as a bonus. It starts out with Robotnik insisting to his badniks that Sonic's a thing of the past as he stands in front of his gravestone. Yeah, right. And thankfully we're told right away that we're not being expected to believe it's the truth. And instead, it's somehow a part of his motivational speech to the robots. Since when would he do this? Wouldn't the speech be about killing Sonic in the first place? What else would it be about? At least this is more creative than the next panel being a flashback to show us how he got to the first panel like I thought. Eggman wants some ideas from his badniks, even though he's supposed to be smarter than them. But being a good engineer doesn't guarantee creativity. I have to assume he thinks he's creatively exhausted and doesn't want to repeat a plan then. One of the small robots wants his attention, and he climbs up to his seat to get it, and it's a Universe Salamander. How in the world is he still alive? He was stomped to death by Supersonic. No wonder the story was scrapped. I'm still interested in seeing how it'd go, but it's a relief to see that it was for the best that it got cancelled. Eggman says he thought he was lost. So did I. He says he'll make him giant with a twist that'll make him invincible. I assume he's lying about the invincible part, and the twist is he'll remove his ability to do stuff Eggman wouldn't want willingly, because that was his only problem with him the first time, and he's supposed to be all about removing free will. Finally, we see the Freedom Fighters, and Antoine wonders if Bunny's ready to play flag football, so it's good to see them doing something for fun that I never saw them do. Bunny says she was born ready because she's from Sec Country, whatever that means. And I remember she's a cyborg and think her super strength would give her an unfair advantage in football, so she must not be allowed to kick the ball. All of the team is going against Sonic, and Sally looks stupid saying that's hardly fair when it's obvious that they're doing this to compensate for Sonic's speed. So she should know that. Sonic says she's right, but he didn't mean it because right away he zips around them and says it's not fair that he can win against them so quickly, snatching all the flags. Why is Tails surprised? This must be the first time they ever tried to play this game with him. Sonic at least says it's a beautiful day, which tries to make him more sympathetic to make up for that. And he gets grabbed by the Universe Salamander. Then he kicks Sonic away. Bunny's got super strength, and he's ignoring her, so it'd be good writing if she used it against him. Right now he's boring me to death by talking too much. Finally, Bunny punches him. Then she gets sent flying away too, in the very next panel. It annoys me because she gets given the Worf effect way too often in this comic as it is. Barely ever getting to be awesome for a while and win a fight. But at least it's not forced that she got smacked away here because she's not nearly fast enough to avoid his attack. And I guess she didn't see it coming. Because Sally said big twice, that gives Rotor an idea. Then Sonic complains about being smacked into an anthill, and a sentient ant yells at him for that, being confusingly rude when he should know who Sonic is since he's so fast. But apparently he does know who he is because when he's told he's lost, he tells him to run in concentric circles in the desert marking the sand until he'd hit a familiar landmark. He thanks him for the brilliant idea. I still find the ant annoying for being mad at Sonic, but at least it's more believable that someone else would come up with this idea instead of Sonic. It might seem confusingly smart for him. Rotor of course comes out of the stump with a reduce and enlarge component used on the robot last time. When he hits it with the reduce ray, it grows. Because Robotnik foresaw this possibility and had installed a device that reverses any energy it absorbs. Okay, why won't they immediately try to make him grow instead? Because that's instantly obvious as an idea. Why is an entire page wasted on this guy? Somehow they just do nothing against them as he says he'll kick them around and try to stomp them. Sonic spin dashes at him, needing to save them. But thankfully Rotor explains that he was going to try to use the enlarge ray on him, but it got smashed before he could. Rotor escapes to the underground base, and Sally says she ordered a device and it just came to her. And Rotor calls it a Nicole 7000. So this is showing a different, original origin for Nicole. On the one hand, it looks very silly because Nicole's way too advanced to be something that anyone could simply order. You'd think a computer that useful would have been Rotor's invention. But at least the case is simple. It's easy to understand, unlike her being made in a stable time loop. But at least with that, it's believable to the audience that a future Rotor could make her. If I don't know who made her right away, then I'm just gonna be distracted wondering how the heroes got so lucky that she could get invented by some nobody. When the creator of Nicole would need to be especially skilled. And Rotor's that and one of the main characters give you more respect from the audience right away. So I'd wonder why a creator was never seen before if he's so much smarter than Rotor. In canon, we got told who made Nicole in the first story she talked in. Well, we'll never know here, which makes her come off as a lazy deus ex machina instead of a character who's cared about by the writer. Sonic and Bunny fight the Universe Salamander, even though he's invincible because it was only to keep him distracted for Rotor. It's annoying that Tails is asked if he's old enough to do this, even though he could fly as far away from him as he wants, and it's just meant to distract him. Antoine acts annoying, and Rotor shows up. And it's surprising that Sonic says he's packing heat, and Rotor's dressed in an army outfit for no reason. He wasted valuable time putting that outfit on just for a joke. He's holding a ray that's labeled as a reducer, and he shoots the robot and shrinks him. It says that he mislabeled it on purpose so that he'd let him hit him. That's impressively smart. He's been useful with his intelligence constantly throughout the story. I wish modern Tails was like this, because he's completely showing him up. This is better than Tails doing something insanely stupid for Sonic, despite knowing it's stupid. Or not preventing Sonic from making a mistake when he knows it'll be a mistake. So that his intelligence just backfires and is usually wasted on him. I'd take a genius saving the day over reactivating Metal Sonic any day. Rotor was so competent that the robot shrinks away into nothing because whatever Robotnik installed in him didn't have a good braking system. Sonic looks serious, and so do the rest of his friends. Sonic says, "Gee, this is where I'd normally make some humorous remark, but that seems inappropriate." This is so much better writing than Sonic the comic after Grimer's cousin got shrunken away, and the same thing happened to Fang. Both times, the so-called heroes of the story didn't react at all like a really good person would. It was smart of them to not care. But this is the reaction you'd expect them to have, although it completely contradicts Sonic being totally casual about stomping him to death the last time he knew him. But since the only way it makes sense for Universal Salamander to still be alive is that he didn't stomp him to death, obviously this is a different universe in the first place where he never did that. Then Nicole says that she thinks based on the current situation for no reason, that Mobius is going to get very complicated, with new faces, complex relationships, and entire worlds opening up. How is the same geography and cultures as Earth even the slightest bit very complicated? This dialogue takes me out of it, so it shouldn't be there. It seems like it would have never been written in the original story because it only references how the comic went on to change after the Underground Knothole era. Which is partially not even its fault because, of course, having a lot more issues would mean having a lot more to it. But with the words very complicated, it comes off as the writer's disdain for that slipping out. Which is unprofessional, as you'd expect this from a hater of the comic who never read most of it. Sure, Kinopolis has a long history, but being creatively inspired isn't a bad thing for a writer to be, obviously. And that city is basically it when it comes to locations on the planet with a ton of development, aside from the Dragon Kingdom. I can understand the writer of the oldest stories preferring his interpretation of the comic, especially since the only things wrong with it are the fourth wall breaks and Antoine abuse. So if nitpicks are the only things that suck about a comic, that's a really good comic by Sonic standards. But the fact is, the comic becoming a bit more complicated is why it became interesting enough to get the devoted fanbase it has, and to have people still be talking about it to this day. Maybe if it never changed from a silly episodic comic, it wouldn't have been memorable and engaging enough for that. So it wouldn't be respectable. Just a kid's book we'd all outgrow and forget. It also wouldn't have had the infamous things about Archie happen, but that's the price you have to pay for a comic that takes risks. At least it stays interesting to an older audience, and that's why it's still talked about. The story ends with Eggman looking mad, while somehow a victory party's being thrown anyways. So that's confusing. Since when does that happen? This story by Mike Gallagher has a confusing return of Universe Salamander. So I'm glad it was scrapped, because it doesn't even bother explaining how he survived getting stomped to death by Supersonic. He didn't have to be the same one. Robotnik could have just built a new one. So at least that's easily fixable. It was an impressive story, because Bunny and Rotor got to be awesome, instead of only Sonic being useful against it. Bunny punches it, and even though it hits her away, that actually doesn't mark the end of her fighting it. Rotor didn't just think to use the Enlarge Ray after it turned out to get grown by the Shrink Ray, but he mislabeled it as a reducer so that he'd be allowed to use it on it. It's great that its defeat was different this time, and it was better written here. Speaking of shockingly smart, even an annoying background character was. Because when Sonic got lost in the desert, he told him to run in circles until he hit a familiar landmark, which was smart because he'd always see the marks in the sand and know where he's been. And if he simply ran ahead, he'd be very likely to run the wrong direction. The guy still left a bad impression because he yelled at Sonic for smacking into his anthill when that wasn't his fault and it was hard enough to avoid getting too damaged. But he prevents Sonic from coming off as favoritized and portrayed as too cool just because he's the series mascot, because he needed to give Sonic this advice. And that's more believable than I'm thinking to do that himself, as he's not known for being so smart that he'd think outside the box instantly. He was lucky he met the ant, but people get lucky in real life too. While the beginning was too confusing, this was actually a good story because the characters you'd expect to be competent were impressively competent, and it had an action scene as its plot. So it was exciting and exactly what you'd expect from Sonic, without being boring by being too much what you'd expect. Because it's a giant animal robot for once.